Welcome to another episode of The Heart and Science of Creative Leadership. My name is Aarti Shah, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Bill Coletti.
Aarti, how you doing?
Oh, I'm excited because today we are introducing a new segment to our podcast. It's called Heartbeats and Science Experiments. And Bill, I'm going to let you explain this to our listeners.
A lot of podcasts have sort of wins and losses, gaps and gains, fails and successes, or whatever some sort of on or off analysis of the week or of the episode or of life. And so we wanted to come up with heartbeats and science experiments. And science experiments are things we're curious about. That's what we want to talk about. Things that we're curious about, both Aarti and I. And heartbeats are where we really kind of get into the humanity of the episode, or human things that are going on in our life, and the work that we're doing. And so that's where we want to talk about the heartbeats or the science experiments.
Yes, and of course, for anyone who hasn't seen the obvious connection, right? The heartbeats and science experiments of creative leadership. So it sort of ties back into sort of the overall theme of our conversations. Let's start with heartbeats. What's making our hearts flutter this week? And I will say, so my friend AG, she has talked about this term. I think she coined it. It's called awe economy, right? So in her 2024 predictions that she does annually for PR Week, she wrote about this. It's this idea that people are seeking these exhilarating once-in-a-lifetime experiences in response to sort of the existential dread of living in this moment of history. And having just come back from seeing the total eclipse in Central Texas, I have to say the awe economy is real. I feel like we're living in this moment where social media and the metaverse sort of want to trap us in this digital reality. And I think people are rejecting that and seeking awesome, in the literal sense of the word, moments. We saw this play out last year with the Eras Tour, for instance, right? And I was thinking about how I'm also reading reports about how young people, don't want to date anymore and they're opting out. And I think there's so many layered reasons for that. But I do think that one of the things that the dating app killed was the exhilaration of sort of locking eyes and having very human connections. So I don't know, this is worth considering at a time where, I feel like brands are pushing people more towards a digital existence because they can track it and monetize it more easily. But there's a real pull towards, that which inspires awe.
Yeah, I know. I love that concept of awe. So my heartbeat is a little bit more personal and to another person. And it's the challenge that a client of mine is having. He's an owner and CEO of a $10 million firm. And he's struggling hiring an executive assistant. And he is really wrapped up in the ego and the negative, trying to be more humble around the impact that this executive assistant would have on culture and team and time. It's firmly believes that it would make him more efficient, but his head tells him it will be a very efficient hire. His heart tells him is he doesn't want anybody to think he's building an office or that he's got an admin. And it's the first time he's been in a role like that. So his heart is really confused, even though his head knows that somebody to help leverage his workflow would make him that much more successful.
I have been in that exact position myself and been worried about the optics of what an executive assistant, the optics of that and what message that sends.
Yeah.
So that's really
I think it's a game changer when people do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the science experiment is, for me, and is one just around what would a investment fund for freelancers that want to start firms, what would a micro donor fund of where we did $25,000 gifts, grants, or investments to freelancers, and they got surrounded with a team of mentors and advisors to help them with all kinds of value-added services as they build a firm. And so they get a cash influx. Maybe you get an equity stake in the firm. But that's kind of what I'm curious about and what that experiment might look like.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I'm curious to hear how this sort of shapes out. So my experiment is I went to a speaker at my son's school recently, and they were talking about boundaries, and something that they said really stuck with me. And it's, boundaries are designed to keep people in. And of course, there's a plethora of ways this plays out in personal relationships and friendships, and I do encourage everybody to chew on that. But I was thinking about it specifically in professional services, right? How boundaries can keep people, clients, in, right? SMBs tend to overservice. They enable scope creep. They really sort of allow tyrant clients to sort of run wild, often on the promise of more revenue in the future. So I would just challenge people to experiment with. I mean, does having no boundaries really play out in the way that they expect? How would putting boundaries help keep that client in? And I think there's some lessons to be learned there. So yeah, I think this is lots of good fodder here for our first beats and experiments.
I love it. Good stuff.
Yeah. So now we will turn to our conversation with Michael Young. Just a few things to listen for, right? Michael talks a lot about working in your business versus working on your business. And I think there's a lot to learn there. So listen for that. And also listen to how this sort of, the dichotomy between finances versus people, how that sort of plays out in sort of operational decisions.
Yeah. And in particular on that latter point, particularly in the context of a big agency versus a boutique agency, with the emphasis on people versus the emphasis on finance. And he's got a really nice stacking of issues, the way he looks at companies that's really quite refreshing, and really true to his brand promise of what he's trying to build, about trying to be sort of an unorthodox holding company model, if you will. It's a different, unique way. So I think he's got a lot of really great things to say about that.
Michael left Access in 2015 and started Millwright Partners, which is a fascinating new model for founders. And I will let Michael explain that more himself. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Millwright sort of born out of an idea that maybe agency holding companies or marketing services holding companies could be done better, having witnessed some of the sins of omission and commission done by others.
Well, we should actually put this into some more context, right? So when you're saying holding companies doing it better, because you've witnessed an acquisition firsthand, right? So when you were at Access Communications, it was bought by Omnicom. And can you tell us a little bit about what that experience, like what did you see in that experience that made you think that there's got to be a better way?
Yeah, well, and I wouldn't, I've seen many acquisitions. I lived, several firsthand, that Omnicom or the Ketchum acquisition of Access. Generally productive, I think, overall over the course of our time together, it generally worked. However, long term, I think the emphasis on financials over people is probably the thing that generally is what implodes services firms post-acquisition. So I saw that, and I think, Aarti, our time in the Valley, you just have to look out your window and you can see the remains of once great and mighty agencies who were destroyed post-acquisition. Now, that's not always the case. There are some examples, some good examples around now that.
But are those the exception, Michael? Is this 70-30, 80-50, 50? What's your hunch on success or post-merger?
Well, I think a lot of acquisition, a lot of M&A in our business, in the creative services business, is typically the acquisition of a business, a founder-led business. And that founder is looking to retire essentially, and put in a few more years, and then leave and go on to do other things. And oftentimes, founder-led businesses are fragile, and unless they're built to last, meaning there's a real depth of management, a depth of team, which we did have at Access. I mean, we had a lot of bench strength at Access. It wasn't just one. It was not just founder led. There were a lot of people there who were there for a long time, like I was, and and the business is still going and going strong today. But I do think more often than not, what you see are agencies that get acquired, the earnout happens, the founder leaves. And, in my own journey, we've acquired two founders, both productively, and there's a cycle to it. So they want to go on, they want to do different things, and that's totally right and makes sense. But then it's a question of what did you actually buy? Did you buy a founder who's really a solopreneur, or did you buy a business? And I think we've tried to focus on businesses rather than kind of just the founder, and make sure that whatever we acquire, whatever we're building, is a business first.
And is that the case for fragility? Is that did you kind of reverse define fragility? Is that if it's a solopreneur, a founder led, as me and my dozen, 30, 40 clients and or whatever that number is, but not a business, is that what fragile means?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and I think a lot of it has to do with the bench, who's behind that founder, and are they attuned to the acquisition, and are they ready for the new world? And I think you have to be, the founder's got to be honest and forthright about what's going to happen post acquisition. And I think a lot of times we tell people are told, oh, nothing's going to change. A lot changes post acquisition.
One of the things that you said that changes post acquisition that can be kind of detrimental to the agency that's being acquired is putting financials over people. And while we are not seeing as many PR agencies being bought by the big holding groups anymore, we are seeing a lot more PE investment. Mm-hmm. I mean, don't you end up with that same problem?
Potentially. I think it comes. It's a question of temperament, right? And strategy. And I think there are PE acquirers who really truly understand the agency business and the agency model. And have done quite well. I mean, you think of, our friend Jim Weiss, has had a couple rounds of PE, done extremely well. They clearly get what's going on. I think the Highwire acquisition is, by all accounts, going extremely well, based on what Shamrock is doing there. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely PE firms that understand this business, and we've certainly met a few over our time, and some get it, some don't.
So whenever you have external investment, right, and the owner is not sort of solely making decisions about the business, that financials over people kind of do become a reality, or at least creep into decision making, maybe in a way that they didn't before the outside investment. How do you guide your agencies in terms of balancing financials over creating a place that people feel engaged and want to work at?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, the founder who once made all the decisions and said, we're going to run our agency business with, let's say more people and a lower profit, for example, than another model, right? Which might be fewer people, higher revenue per employee, and higher profit. Those things get worked out over time. And I think, there are compromises. There are things that you must do, and there are things that you should do. And I think, we've tended to make decisions on people first. And I think I'm pretty sure we have receipts for that. and that in our business, it's people, clients, results, and if you put them in that order, it tends to work out pretty well. If you focus on the results and not the people, then you're creating a future deficit. And I think coming up in the agency business, I've seen both sides of this equation, and I think more often than not we try to get it right in terms of focus on people and clients, and the results will take care of themselves. If you're managing to an EBITDA percentage that is somehow been defined and decided, then you have other problems. And you see it's cyclical. You see agencies doing layoffs, letting people go in downtimes as a result of that. So
we had an owner talk to us recently, and one of the hallmarks that she thought really made her stand out was a number of things, but one in particular is through all of the various cycles, and been in business since the early 2000s, so 20 years, let's say, and said never had to do a layoff, and that was a sort of a nice badge of honor. Layoffs are horrible. They're horrible for everybody involved, but sometimes they need to be done for right sizing, and sometimes they need to be done for market reality and market reasons. If someone were to hold that out as a banner or a badge of success, that we've never done a layoff, is that an indication of good leadership? Is that an indication of fear to make those kind of decisions? Just react to that notion of I'm never going to lay anybody off, and that's how I want you to grade me as an owner, because I've never had to do that over 20, 25 years. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'd say they're incredibly lucky, first and foremost. Look, I mean, it could be both, right? It could be an incredible sense of foundation and leadership. It could also be somebody who may not be, facing up to some tough choices. Yeah, could be both.
Yeah, and those tough choices are what I'm seeing. Is that's I've said before, it's easy to be an entrepreneur when it's easy. It's hard to be an entrepreneur when it's hard. These are tough. These are real. And we've also had people mention, well, we didn't take a bonus, a partner, a husband and wife kind of thing. We didn't take a bonus so that, Janie could stay on staff or whatever the case may be. That's not a tough call. I mean, it's the way I think about it. Having to make the other call is almost a little bit harder.
I want to go back to this formula, right? Because when I was handling best agencies to work for, it seemed so simple, right? It's deceptively simple, right? You keep your people happy, they'll keep the clients happy, and the business will perform the way you expect. It obviously is not that simple. And now, Michael, that you've watched this formula play out from so many different angles. Where do things go awry most often?
Well, there are a lot of places, and I wouldn't say there's one. And I just thinking about the last statement about when it's easy or everybody can do this. I think there is a lot. I think everybody can do it. I don't think everybody's cut out for it.
Should do
and
it.
I think
everybody can, but I'm not sure they should do it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, they can do it. They may not. Maybe they shouldn't do it. And I think over the long haul, I think people tend to underestimate how hard it is. It's a very simple business, right? I say this all the time. It's a simple business. That doesn't mean it's an easy business. It's a very hard business because we are a service business serving our clients first and foremost in what is, an ever more difficult and more challenging business and media environment. And so, where does it go awry? I think where it typically goes awry is when we stop focusing on growth of the business and our people. That's usually where it starts to you start to get in trouble, and that may sound somewhat contradictory to focus on your people, but I think our people want growth opportunities. They want new things to work on. And that means new clients, and that means we've got to stay focused on building the business and finding new opportunities for our people, but also for our business and growing our business. There has to be that constant resiliency and growth.
One of the things we've talked about is this sort of hypothesis that I've sort of framed up around. There's a couple of big archetypes of firms. You have lifestyle firms that are sort of built around the individual owner and a team of people, 6 to 12, whatever that number is of a team of people, serving clients in a particular niche and just doing really good for a really long time. And then you have performance firms that are growing and growing sort of at a financial level and are running themselves for performance. So gross distinction, lifestyle versus performance. You mentioned growth, and when you start seeing that stalling of growth, that's one of the things you see of when folks get into trouble. Talk about what you see as kind of the metrics of growth, because I've seen lifestyle firms that are not doing 10% year over year top line growth, but are going into new verticals, doing exciting things, seeing one right now on AI, doing a real cool scholarship program, or they're growing in different definitions. So talk a little bit about, love your reaction to that model of performance lifestyle, but also what's growth? What does growth mean?
Yeah. So I think you're right. Those are fairly accurate segmentations of our business, and neither one is right or wrong. It all depends on what you want to do. I think growth is, it is top line revenue growth for sure, but it can also be some of the things that you characterized. Could be geographic expansion, could be service offering expansion. Could be the deployment of new systems, new technologies. Those are other models of growth. I think, and I think getting diversification is also a place of growth, and that could be, is it the founder who is, or the CEO who is doing all of the media interviews or doing all of the awards, or is it the team? And are they growing? So I think you can put a growth metric against every single part of the business and look at it. Are we, are our clients staying? That's a measure of growth. Do we have good client tenure? Are we expanding the work we're doing with clients? So I'd look at it very holistically. Are people growing? Are we keeping them? Are we promoting them? Those are the things. Those are the questions that I would be asking about growth.
So when you're looking for agencies to sort of roll into Millwright Partners, what are the metrics that you use, and what are some of the attributes that you look for in the founders that you feel like they would be a good fit?
Yeah, and I think right now, Aarti, we're, through MXP Ventures, which is the venture fund I co-founded with Thilo Bono from Berlin. I think what we're looking at are new, maybe first-time or serial entrepreneurs who want to start and build. And I would say the thing we look for, or the things we look for, is, do they have a growth mindset? Are they business people and entrepreneurs first, or are they creatives or agents, kind of agency people that want to get into, a new business or a entrepreneurial place. And I think those that are entrepreneurs first and business builders do very well. And I think that's typically what we've sought out are folks who not only have a great idea about the kind of firm that they want to start, but focus on business fundamentals. That old thing about working on the business rather than in the business, and that's a challenging move when you are, starting from scratch. But it can be done, and I think those are the folks that really we're looking for and resonate with our model.
How hard is it to flesh that out? I mean, is it I trust my instincts, and you get into a conversation with somebody, and I ran a crisis firm, and you sit with the CEO, you kind of know. You just sort of get the situation pretty quickly. Can you suss that out, the folks that are in the business, on the business, growth mindset versus something else? Can you see it quick?
We like to think we can. I think we've been pretty good at it overall. We've had some situations that didn't go as planned, as you would expect. In sort of 10 at bats, you're not going to hit a home run every time. But I think you can see it. You can see where their primary focus is, right? And I do think, what's we've learned a lot of is, how do we then measure that in the first, quarter, in the first half year, in the first year.
Pre-deal? Pre-deal or out?
No. I'm saying post-deal.
Okay.
Yeah, post-deal, then, we still have to measure it. I think we've gone on intuition. We've looked at, very strong business plans, but at the end of the day, the rubber's going to meet the road, and we have to be able to, we have to see this thing start to, move in the right direction. And get some wins on the board. It's not a linear path.
Well, can I ask you to elaborate a bit more on the times that it didn't go right? Because I think there's probably lessons that can be learned, and I wonder if anyone would see themselves in some of those situations, or at least in some of the folks who maybe thought they were built for entrepreneurship but were not.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, back to this is a relatively simple business, right? Buy for $1, sell for $2. You should be able to find clients, contract with them, find the problems they need solved, get a scope of work, get a contract, go to work, and do that at a margin that is productive, right? That's the business. Simple as that. And I think, when it's not gone well is there isn't a lot of kind of internal clarity on those points. We try to keep everybody focused on those numbers, but I think at the end of the day, when it hasn't gone well, the individual or individuals were not able to see that their job is growth all day, every day, growing the business, growing the agency. And, and what winds up happening is then the opportunities become fewer, the problems become bigger, the labor cost and the revenue don't line up, and then it's not a business. And so I think at least in the couple cases that we've had where things did not go well, it really came down to what was the founder's focus. And I think it became they were doing the work and they saw that the work itself was the job rather than finding great opportunities and building a team that can deliver that and solve those problems. So it sounds like the same thing, but they're actually two very different mindsets and behaviors and practices and disciplines and temperaments. And I think, and we've had a couple of folks who, got into it and didn't at first blush looked like they were cut out for it. But a few of those have turned out to be, a few of our highest performers, right? They had self-doubt, they had, question marks. But I think that's where, with a little bit of backing, some advice, some mentorship, some counsel, and sort of some pushing, we've been able to, turn those into some very productive businesses.
And I think just to my yes and to that is just the simple clarity. You said, I think you said something to the effect of, everybody's heard of Michael Gerber's work of In Your Business and On Your Business. I'm surprised when I talk to people, a lot of people haven't heard of that, which is just kind of table stakes. So I think we should feel that way about just about everything in our life. Not everybody's heard of it. And so being reminded, there's another way. There's another way. You don't have to be in every campaign. You don't have to be in every client negotiation, conversation, fill in the blank of whatever the task is. And just a clarity that on the business is a real job, and on the business is a critical job. And I just think people need to be maybe less reminded, but hey, there's a different way to be an entrepreneur. It's not being chief cook and bottle washer, which you've sort of been fantasized in mythology. There's actually a different way, and probably a much better way to be an entrepreneur, on your business.
Well, absolutely, and I think in the creative industry in general, and speaking, as somebody who's watched and observed other leaders in this business, I think there is that gravitational pull always back to the work, and it's good, it's right. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think what separates the entrepreneur from, a great solopreneur, a lifestyle person is somebody who is really geared toward building a business that is sustainable over the long term.
But I'm thinking about folks who are listening, right? And the reason that clients would choose a boutique agency or a founder-run agency, right? And oftentimes what that client is looking for is they want that founder involved in the business. And I know we've moved away from a world in which founders are putting their names on their shingles for partly for this reason, right? They don't want to be that intertwined with the business and client expectations. But what would you say to a founder who's listening who can't extract themselves necessarily from being in the business because that's what they've built their value proposition around?
Yeah. And again, nothing wrong with that, right? Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that if that's how you want to run your business. I think what it is generally is an indication that you've not developed a team, you don't have a succession plan, that you are potentially the single point of failure. So I think in that sense, again, nothing wrong with it. If you want to be that, if you want the spotlight always to be on you, great, fantastic. It is exhausting. It's not really scalable, truly. And I think, at least in my observation of, I've looked at the financials of probably 45 agencies. And I think that's not a lot, right? I mean, there are people who've looked at hundreds and thousands. I'm not saying that's a lot, but it's enough of many different sizes. And I think this is often the point at which the business no longer grows, right? Is the need to have the spotlight on the founder needs to have the spotlight on themselves versus somebody who said, you know what, I'm going to build a business that would survive if I got hit by a lottery ticket. And, and lo and behold, those businesses tend to be the ones that grow consistently over time.
So I have a follow-up to that. I don't know that it's necessarily that the founder wants a spotlight. I don't know that it's an ego thing, right?
No,
when I've spoken to founders, it's the issue is they haven't been able to find talent or anyone who's as invested in the business as they are, right? So, they may find a superstar VP, SVP, but that person at, 3 years in gets another job, they're out the door, and suddenly, it's the founder who's thrust kind of back into the business, or any scenario like that. So, what advice would you give to folks who maybe they do want to let go, but they just haven't? The circumstances haven't allowed them to.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting it was an ego-driven choice. It's some of it is fate, some of it is destiny, some of it are choices that we make, and I think it is a personnel problem, first and foremost. Yeah. That's it. That's all it is. It's a personnel problem. And if you see it as a personnel problem, meaning you've got to find and hire that person who you truly believe is better than you and can replace you, that's what you need to do. That's the only way to do it.
How do you keep that person at the agency, the person who's better than you and can replace you?
Yeah. Well, that's, compensation, bonus, incentive comp, all that.
Environment. It's about the environment. It's about work.
Environment.
There's a whole basket of things that build into that portfolio. And the other thing is, so Aarti, your question, it's a great question. It's fundamentally a talent problem, solving that, finding the right person, paying them, compensating them with that full basket. But it's also, I'm a firm believer, it's about in systems. How do we systematize and create processes that are replicable so that everybody can get on board and understand what step 2 is, what step 3 is? And I've found creatives want to reject that because it doesn't let me be an artist. I want to go from step 2 to step 4 to step 6 to step 3. But when you realize that liberation comes with constraint, and when you actually find a system that works, it then is actually quite liberating. And with talent that's smarter, as Michael said, smarter and better than you, that's really when you hit that. Last thing is, for most of us, for me, my first 3 years, I usually say, well, nobody can do it. I'm the only one that can do it because I'm this great sage. But when someone tapped me on the shoulder or hit me on the side of the head and said, no, just write it all down. That was the beginning of systems. And then B, go find her, go find that person. And I did. I was like, oh, so that's what that meant. That's what you guys have been talking about of systems and talent. And it really made a lot of sense to me. But it took me getting hit by the side of the head to figure it out.
So when we're talking about this basket, ultimately what I think a lot of founders run into is their teams, even with, incentives and bonus structures, are simply just not as invested in the business as they are. Susan, I think famously Susan Butenoff, did not believe in giving away any pieces of her business. And she was able to retain, including Michael, a really great senior bench. So I think it's possible. Michael, do you think that one needs to, like what do you think about giving away pieces of the business, giving folks equity as a retention tool?
Yeah, look, I think it sometimes can work, and it does work. Susan also, had a bonus structure. We had a bonus plan that was absolutely crystal clear. You knew based on we shared business performance with everybody in the company. They knew where we were. We knew what targets we were trying to hit, and the bonus structure was clear, which is very different in many organizations, right? I remember famously being sat down by someone at a large agency early in my career and being told I wasn't going to get my bonus, and there was no talk of that prior to that moment. And I was just like, I don't think that's
why.
Right. And how did you arrive at that situation? And, how did
do
you
we get
arrive
to
at
zero?
Well, and all he was trying to do was make himself look good for his bosses.
Sure. Yeah.
I ultimately got the bonus, but I think Susan really, built a system and a model that was clear. And so, yes, equity can have benefits, but that's not really the only thing that will keep somebody in the business, because what they care about more often than not is performance incentives based on how well the business does, and they understand how the numbers work. And I think that's where a lot of agency founders go awry. And I've seen some bonus plans where it's like, well, if we hit X, Y, and Z, and Jupiter is in retrograde, and I like the shirt you're wearing that particular
and I feel
day,
like it, and I feel like it,
and I feel like
Yeah.
it, you'll get your bonus.
Yes.
And that's actually how Susan kept everybody on side.
Right.
Is there was a lot of clarity.
Yeah, clarity and transparency. Which is
Aarti, I was waiting for you to say the T word, or somebody to say the T word. Is that's Aarti, that's been a thread for us, is this notion of transparency. And so, Michael, I'd love to get your thoughts. So I think you're an advocacy. You didn't say transparency. You said clarity. We've heard that a lot. Talk about, is there such a thing as an owner to your team of too much transparency? What are guardrails? How would you advise? I run a business. We're a $5 million firm. Michael, I need your guidance on how transparent should I be? Do I talk to my team like I talk to my accountant and my wife? Or let's start there, and then subjective bonus pools as the bottom. How do you give me guidance on talking about transparency?
Yeah. Well, I think not every issue has to be completely, discussed and exposed all the way across the business, right? There were times in COVID when I didn't think we were going to make it, right? I had evidence, I had proof that we probably weren't going to survive, and I didn't share that with anybody. I just kept that to myself. But I think what financial goals are we trying to reach? What kinds of client retention, client satisfaction goals are we? Where are we on that? How much new business do we need to close this month, this quarter, this year? We want people's help in maximizing their, I don't want to get into a time for value discussion, but we have so many hours in the day, right? So what are our people doing while they're sitting at their computer, probably at home in this day and age, although there are others who are working back in offices, but what are they doing? And I think that's a great point of transparency. Like, as a business owner, I'm willing to be very transparent with people about how we're doing as a business. I also expect to have a lot of transparency in terms of how they're spending their time while they are at work, right? So I think it has to go both ways. It's not a one-way street. And I think, in a collaborative environment, you need that two-way transparency. But I think those are some guardrails. You don't have to tell everybody, hey, I don't, we're not going to be able to make payroll this week, right? Right? Like we're going to have to tap into our line of credit. No, they don't need to know that. That'll just freak people out. But I think the things like, here's our revenue goal for the year. Here's how much new business we need to close. Here's our win rate. Here's our staff utilization. Here's our revenue per employee, right? Those kinds of metrics, I think, are very, very important. And I think, the other observation I've had about very senior people who've worked in agencies, they don't all understand the sharp end of the stick in terms of financials.
They don't need to. They just, they just go do the work,
they
do
just
the thing.
Show up for work, do their thing. But, again, back to what do we look for, and what is it that makes for a successful entrepreneur? It's somebody who's been at the sharp end of the stick, right? They understand, revenue, labor cost, OpEx, net profit. And they understand things like revenue per employee and revenue per client and client profit margin percentage, right? Over-servicing, under-servicing, those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of topics that should be discussed openly and regularly, and often. How are people spending their time?
So how are people spending? I want to stop on that for a minute. So, because we've also talked about, right, keeping people engaged, and part of that is giving people some autonomy and trust, right? Yeah. I mean, that's all the research has shown, especially high performers. So what do you mean when you say you want visibility or transparency into how they're spending their time? Are we talking like every 15-minute time increments?
Oh, God, no. God, no. God, no.
Are you tracking keystrokes? Well, because I know of agency owners that right at COVID, they did not trust their employees. So they were installing software to like track keystrokes and, I've seen the cameras, right? That they'll periodically take your photo to see if you're sitting there. So what are we in our business? What is transparency? What kind of transparency do you expect from your employees?
Yeah. Well, look, I think if we take the notion that in professional services, there's such a thing as engagement risk that we internalize as a business when we take on a client. And within that engagement risk model, there are opportunities and there are threats to our business. One of the ways that I want to know how people are spending their time is there a lot of breakage? Is there a lot of rework? Are things not going well? If we said we're going to do A, B, C, D for the client, have we gotten past A? That's how I want to understand how people are spending their time. Is it going well? Are we getting the results that the client hired us for? That's what we need to know as business leaders. And if it's taking a junior person 8 hours to do a task that should take 1 hour, those are the kinds of things that managers should be tuned into. How's your work going? Are things going well? Where are you running into problems? Where that's what I mean about spending their time. I'm not looking at timesheets. I'm asking the question, what kind of risk have we internalized with this particular client? Meaning, can we deliver what we're contracted for in a reasonable and productive amount of time? And again, it's not to say we're billing by the hour. We're not. But it does take time to do things. So those are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves: is how's it going? How are you spending your time? Are you buried in transcripts and research? Cool. Got it. There are now amazing tools that can allow you to summarize. If you just think about, again, I'll roll back we could just roll back the tape to when we started in our career. We used to take notes. We still do. Some of us still do. But that was the method by which information was transferred. Now, most client onboarding, if we're onboarding a new client and we're meeting with a subject matter expert, that's typically a video call that we record. We can get that transcribed. We can put that transcription through a large language model like ChatGPT. We can get it summarized. That takes minutes and hours, where that used to be somebody's job, right? So where are we spending our time? Are we spending our time on new creative ideas at the edge of the conceptual and creative frontier? Or do we have, we hired smart people out of good schools with good degrees, and are we treating them like they're AI robots? And so that's what I mean about how we're spending time. And if we're in a place where we're questioning somebody's, eye movements and whether they're sitting at their desk, and I understand there are people like that. There are people who want to have every monitor in the agency so they can see what everybody's doing on their screen. I understand that, but that's the wrong model. That's the wrong metric.
And that's not a place that will
right?
keep really good talent either.
And that's not a place that people want to work either,
Exactly.
right? So, and you have a different problem. You have a personnel problem, right? You don't have the right people working for you.
That's the wrong system to solve the talent problem.
Wrong system to solve the problem. So
before we jump into this, you sort of gave us a good segue into AI, and perhaps this is connected. Did you say you don't work off the hourly billing model?
Well, I don't. We typically don't. We track our time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do track our time.
But how do you charge clients?
Retainer.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Monthly retainer.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a certain scope that's attached to that retainer work, and we manage that on our side. If that gets, if we get pulled out of shape, again, due to breakage, due to impossibility, that can often be a problem. Back to engagement risk. Sometimes we take on a problem that we can't solve, and we need to know that quickly. We don't, if we run up to, hey, it's taking team A, an extraordinary amount of time, much longer than we anticipated, we could look at that and say, hey, maybe that's us. Maybe that's our people. Maybe that's the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity of the problem. Okay. Or it may not be a problem we can solve. And if it's not a problem we can solve, we should not be necessarily using our time and our people and our resources.
And fess up to it and go to the client with another side of transparency.
We need a different set of parameters because these are not working.
Yeah, these rules of engagement don't get it done. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we want to talk to you a little bit about AI and get some of your thoughts, but we want to be careful. This isn't a futurist podcast, so don't want to necessarily predict, but I want to try a question, and then maybe that'll open the door, Aarti, for us to have a conversation just about it writ large. So I had an experience with one of our clients. We were talking about AI, coaching client with a founder. And a moment ago, you were talking about the leader going down to the team to know what they're doing. What are you working on? And maybe coaching and advising, maybe you could do this, or if you use this technology, or if you thought about that. The leader was struggling with, I don't know what the hell's going on with AI. And I got my most junior members of my team that are innovating and bringing me innovation. And so one thing is just leaders to be open to new ideas and to really cultivate that from their junior team. But what are you seeing today on how folks are deploying AI in a way that's making sense, that's efficient in the now, in the real, not where you think it could go in the future? But what are you seeing, and how are people using it now effectively? And is that the top-led, owner-led, or is it kind of bubbling up from the bottom? Are you seeing it from the junior team sort of helping driving some of that thinking?
All the above. All of the above. All of the above. I mean, I think Well, and I will say this: I think we're at the very earliest days and earliest stages of um, the use and the deployment of AI in services. And again, I've referenced Aarti when we were um, chatting. I just, read that Harvard study that they did with BCG. And there are things within the frontier of AI's capabilities, like take this transcript, summarize it, give me the 10, give me the talking points, and summarize, clean up the language, put it into summary form. Some of the basic prompt writing is now getting widely distributed, and people know how to use it for those things. There's a whole nother dimension to this, which I don't think we're even close to, at least in our business. We're starting to look into things and deploy things, but the ability to, for example, monitor a certain situation. Okay, monitor a crisis, monitor a set of business cases, and keep that information updated in real time. Again, that used to be someone's job, right? And there are lots of tools out there that can give you competitive intelligence and media monitoring and things like that. And I worry for those companies in particular.
Yeah.
Decisions, the Meltwaters of this
can
world.
be done freer and faster.
Oh yeah, it can be done freer and faster. And so those kinds of opportunities where if I really want to understand an issue, GPT, Claude, any of these tools with some modifications, and a lot of it does go into the custom instructions that you give these systems, right? If you just treat them like, if you treat it like the Google search bar, and every time you come to it, it's a new thing, you get some utility out of it. What I've now been exposed to and what we're working on are how do we actually train these systems I want to train it to write like me. I want to train it to in a way think like me, not all the time, right? I need it to do other things, but the customization that you can do with these systems, and the customizations are getting better and better and better, and they're getting more fluid, and there are also more other systems that you can pull into these systems now, right? So third party apps are now being written so that you can call them from ChatGPT and other systems, and vice versa. You can embed GPT into other systems. That is where this then becomes a game changer, and where people's time and their ability to focus on the solution to the problem rather than understanding the problem and coming up with, the minimum understanding, that usually takes 80% of the time. Just to understand the problem takes a long time. Now we can understand problems much faster. It doesn't mean it means our human brains can then start to think about recommendations and ideas and creative solutions and answers to tough questions, which we will still have to do.
And that's the value add. That's the value add.
Yeah,
that bottom level,
yeah.
which we used to get paid for, is no longer value add. It's that cream on top is the value add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always thought about, because I remember this with like scoring media coverage, right? This was one of those, like back in the days when we did things with stone axes
and fax
right?
machines.
We would get
fax machines.
Yeah. We would hire some person out of a, good university. They had a good degree, and we'd put them in front of a computer, and we'd have them read coverage, and we'd have them score it.
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like,
And
right?
yes.
We were all there, and we did it.
Okay, but can I let's go back up for a second. So it feels like there's two major applications for AI in terms of AI both in like on the business, right? So sort of identifying efficiencies and some of the things that you're talking about. And there's AI sort of in the business and how it's actually, driving output, right? And I mean, PR Week now has a category, best use of AI in comms tech. And they had a McDonald's campaign that won this year that was able to do an AI generated TV commercial around Chinese New Year. They were able to, I think the way that PR Week described it was a near magical interactive sort of, AI experience where they were able to sort of give away, there was the year of the tiger giving way to the year of the rabbit. So are you thinking about AI both in terms of, like business efficiencies, which I'm sure every founder is, but also sort of how it's going to augment like output and deliverables to clients?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said, Aarti, we're just at the very beginning of our understanding of how to use these tools. And I think the example you cited, and there are many, many, many others.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
There are tools that are just, I just came in contact with this tool called LTX Studio, which is essentially you can make a movie, right, from prompts, and it'll create characters, and the characters are persistent, and the dialogue, you can edit it. So those kinds of creative deployments are fantastic. I think the other thing is I think one of great AI's great powers is the ability to collapse things that were once wildly separate from a creative standpoint. Let me envision business leaders as animals, or let me envision, Coca-Cola as as a math problem. Like those are the kinds of things that we can do that we could never do before, and we can then get output. And again, back to this, you would need to spend years and years and years on how to become a filmmaker, or a tool like, or a graphic designer. And by the way, I'm not suggesting ever that these tools will replace the best in our industry, because I don't believe that. I believe that there will be a place for AI generated content, but it will almost always fall far short of the emotional payload that we can deliver as humans. And that's ultimately what moves people and moves markets and has clients.
Sure. And to that point, like, I mean, the McDonald's example was an example of someone doing it right. But I don't know if you all are watching this play out, where people are identifying TikTok on TikTok, or, Threads or whatever platform, they're identifying AI generated images and really poking fun at them, right? Because they have this distinct smoothness, and they don't have the depth and like sort of the blurry, like, all of that nuance that you see in quote real images. I mean, even Taylor Swift, she put out an image for her new album a few days ago, and the initial feedback was, is this all AI? Like, did she not really invest in anything? So, I mean, there is a risk. There's a risk in being called out, especially if it doesn't feel like it is resonating with people.
Yeah, and I think synthetic content will exist alongside of human-powered, human-created content, and they will be very, very, very different. And again, they're not. Neither one is right or wrong.
Right.
There will be a little bit of Venn diagram overlap between the two. I think humans will be able to expand upon their own creative initiatives and thinking, and see it deployed. I think that's really the benefit of, you can see this thing visualized instantly.
Yeah.
Show me Santa Claus in a post-apocalyptic urban hellscape.
Right. And do we want Santa Claus wearing a green hat or a blue hat or a red hat?
Exactly.
Right. And then maybe you have your human designers then go and actually create that image, but you can iterate with
helps
AI.
with creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Michael, let's go back to that hypothetical. So I need some advice. So I am the founder of a $7 million issues managed corporate public affairs firm, do some public relations, all obviously B2B type clients. We're not doing a lot of high level commercial type stuff, but we're an advisory firm is what we like to call ourselves. Give me a handful of things I need to be doing in April of 2024 around AI. What should I be thinking about as the owner of an agency? The type may not matter, but as I'm the owner of a creative services firm, what do I need to be doing and thinking about today, not to be a futurist, but to be a survivor today?
Yeah. Well, your clients all have competitors, or the clients of this
agency,
hypothetical agency, all have competitors. So how well do we as a team understand the initiatives, the strategy, the current, if you just take the management discussion out of the the quarterly filing, right? If we just ingested all of that into an AI system and had it summarized, the entire team could be kept up to date in a way that they couldn't 2 years ago, right? So again, the senior team should be thinking about not only our client, but what's going on in the boardrooms and factory floors of our competitors. What better way to do that? If you were thinking about, maybe some of them are, have sustainability initiatives. How about ingesting the corporate sustainability report and then comparing and contrasting it to the sustainability report of their top 5 competitors? That could take a human, how long? Weeks?
I mean,
a week.
Yeah, let's just call it a week.
A good analyst would take them a week.
Yep, absolutely.
AI could do that for you in an hour. So
with the little bit of handcrafting of the prompts in that hour. Yep.
Yeah, a little handcrafting of the prompts. Maybe the outputs, need some examination and so on. But just that alone makes everybody smarter. We deal with the media, right? So one of my favorite prompts, and the one I will, use to teach this to other people in the company, is write me a subject line for reporter, fill in the name, that will get her to open my email based on the last 5 articles that she's written about AI.
Love it.
And give me 5 more.
Yeah.
And 5 more. And then go test that and see how that works. Cite your sources. Those are things that AI can do now, and that, again, would take, if I said to, because I used to do this all the time, look, we want to pitch, Matt Levine at Bloomberg. Go get me the last 5 things he's written about, topic A, bank balance sheets, right? That would take somebody hours. That can now be done in minutes and seconds. So those are the low-hanging fruit.
But do I need a VP of AI in my agency? Do I need a Mr. or Mrs. AI in the firm, or are we all that? Like, we don't have a Mr. or Mrs. email.
Yeah, I don't think you have a Mr. or Mrs. email. I think you don't have a VP of email. I think, I think these things are, they work without knowing anything about how they work, which is great. That, leads to a set of problems that need to be clearly understood, and there are warnings and red flags that abound with the fact that these systems are opaque and don't disclose how they arrive at their conclusions. But I think, again, with customization, with training, with building our own individual research bots, and you can create a research bot, you can create an idea bot, you can create a critique bot, right? So you can just create a bot that will just critique the results of other bots.
Right. I mean, what I find is necessary is you do need someone, whether that's the CEO or someone that's been tasked, is to create some policy, create some guardrails, to make it very clear as to what, like ethically what's allowed, what kind of transparency disclosures are you doing, both with your interactions with, whether that's reporters, whether that's with clients. So, I mean, I think that has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And do you need someone? I mean, just, we used to always ask, like, what does it mean to be VP of digital anymore, right? Given that our entire lives, right, live on digital now. And even I remember when I was doing Agency of the Year, we had a hard time picking Digital Agency of the Year because we didn't really know how we were measuring that often. And it kept changing, right? So yeah, I think that's more important. Like who's really driving the policies around AI's usage at an agency,
and be smart and careful because the synthetic stuff can get people into trouble. And we've seen some of it. But we're gonna see a lot more of it because I think there's going to be a whole sleuthiverse out there trying to catch corporations doing silly, stupid things, maybe driven by agencies.
Well, and there is this idea that, if you have Publicis out there, like investing $300 million in AI, right? Maybe you let them figure, like maybe your agency of 10 million doesn't need to be the one to be the groundbreaking force on AI. Maybe you let Publicis go out there and figure out some best practices. And then there is a sense of that. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, this was, of course, a lively discussion. Michael, it's always so interesting to have conversations with you, and thank you for taking the time to join us today.
I appreciate it. It was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, when you're a great resource for owners, and we'll obviously have your contact information. But I think as owners are figuring out in lifestyle performance, hopefully we've left people to put all that in a Venn diagram and make some decisions on who they want to be. I believe whatever choice it is, that it's done with intention. You got to be intentional about your leadership and be intentional about your entrepreneurship and not stumble into it.
Absolutely. Great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks,
both.
guys.
Thanks. What a great conversation with Michael.
Yeah, and Aarti, thank you for bringing him. Michael's not someone I had known previously, and you introduced us, and so really terrific conversation. So thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome. Michael, I've been a big fan of Michael since back at his Access days. And one of the things that stood out to me is when he talked about, there are many ways to measure growth, right? When you're an entrepreneur, beyond just, top and bottom line growth, expansion, capabilities, client tenure, promotions. And this idea that you can put a growth metric on any aspect of the business. And I started to wonder sort of how robust this kind of measurement is, especially at smaller agencies. I'm sure some of this stuff is being tracked, annually, but I wonder how often it's being tracked quarterly or even monthly, right? And how much insight that would give you into pivot points and, identify crises before they happen.
It's critical and so true. He did rattle off, my recollection is that, close to 10 of different things. And so whatever an agency owner feels right, but they got to measure something. And I think they got to, I've seen a dashboard written by another consultant that's got 6 to 8 financial data points that you need to look at monthly. And then he adds on 5 or 6 more that you look at quarterly. And I think just and they're all growth and success oriented metrics. So I think to that other point, he said, people that run their firms like a business, I think if you're listening to this or you're an investor looking at firms like Michael, owners that don't measure things are owners that are driving without a steering wheel, flying without a map, pick your metaphor. I think there's some tried and trues, but even if you don't have those, just pick something and get a handful of data points, critical stuff.
Well, I think that exactly right. I mean, and the reason that an entrepreneur might tell you that they're not tracking things as frequently as maybe would be helpful is that they are so busy working in the business that they can't work on the business, right? And we've talked a lot about how agency culture rides on vibes, and this is an incredibly good vibe check, right? Is being able to track some of these things. So the on versus in, I thought that was another great point that he made.
Yeah, it's something that I went through my own journey on that of holding myself out as the owner of the firm that was in the business. I was in the work. There's no client that didn't know me and didn't know me 2 or 3 levels deep or 2 or 3 levels up. And I was stalled because I was trading time for money. And that's what it was. And then had the ability of getting clarity around working on my business and sort of building systems, building procedures, building the way we investing in people, not just sort of helpers, people helping me. But when I see it with other owners as well, it's an absolute game-changing pivot point of those that see that distinction, one, and then operationalizing it, two, in a way that meets their needs. But I think working on your business is where growth and scale and freedom comes from. And so I love the way Michael talks about it.
Yeah, I think liberation comes with constraint, I think was the actual phrase he said. But I wanted to raise a point about that. And I actually can't remember if it was you or Michael who said this, that kind of emphasizing that working on the business is a real job. And that made me wonder if there is a perception issue here, right? Like if you're working on the business versus in the business, how is that landing with clients, with staff? And is there a risk? Like what's the exposure to risk if you remove yourself from being in the business? And, anecdotally, I've seen this entrepreneurial story play out many times. It's usually at an agency that is under $10 million. And at some point, the founder realizes that they need to focus on and not in. So they step back, they hire a leadership bench who comes in and sort of takes over, working in the business. I've seen that fail more often than I've seen it work. And what ends up happening often is within, 18 months to 3 years, usually less than 3 years, that whoever they hired in is exited out of the agency, and the owner will say to me, "Oh, well, I realized that I needed to get back in the business. I needed to be much more involved, and I tried to be hands off, and it didn't work."
Yeah. And that anecdote, I'm sure that's real, and I know it's real because I've seen it as well. I would challenge that. Is that the exception or is that the rule? And is that also the way the leader did the way they do the working on their business? And so there could be a lot to unpack there. But the way I encourage people to think about it, it's much like a pilot and flying an airplane and doing what's called a cross country. The pilot, in this case, the entrepreneur, has to be actively engaged in takeoff and actively engaged in landing. But once they get in cruise altitude, they don't jump out of the plane and just sort of ignore what's going on. They're monitoring things. They're seeing what's going on. They've mapped out a really good game plan. We're going to go from, Chicago to Milwaukee. And they've mapped that out in that context. But they're involved when they're taking off and they're involved when they're landing. And so what I hear people bastardizing in and on is, to now mix our airplane metaphor with an apartment metaphor, is this doesn't mean you're an absentee landlord. It doesn't mean you're just like, "Oh, you kids run the company. I'm working on the business." It doesn't really work that way. The pilot is still in the cockpit. The pilot's still doing the work, but he's turned on the autopilot, maybe handed it over to the co-pilot. But when needed to take off and land and maybe deviate around weather, the pilot's there. And that's what I think. Those are the good things around in thinking about on your business, not, jumping out of the plane or absentee landlord.
Yeah, no, I think I really like that analogy. And I think one of the things you and I talked about was, like systems and talent. Like that's really the pathway to success, is focusing on those things. And systems can be something as simple as just writing everything down. Like write everything down that you're doing. That in and of itself is a system.
Yeah, I love it, and we've talked about it and one on one, but also on the podcast, is that systems gets a bad rap sometimes, particularly by creatives, and so there's the way you build an airplane, and then there's systems that NASA has. Those are pretty complicated systems. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way we do the work. At a minimum, memorialize a dozen or so questions that are inflection points. We all pretty much know the trajectory and sort of the arc of engagements. Is that just create, as an owner, create a handful of touch points, questions, and ways you engage with clients. That's a system, and that's actually replicable. Then back office, I think the way we onboard clients, the way we contract clients, the way we exit clients, all that should be memorialized, and the way we write proposals, all that should really be fixed, and as much cut and paste and as much replication as possible, because it just creates efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great starting point, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, just, memorialize those dozen or so questions that are key inflection points for clients that you've seen consistently across accounts. Well, this was such a great conversation. I feel like there's even, I know we say this often, but I think this time in particular, there was a lot we didn't even get to with Michael. So
yeah, and I think his whole holding company model is fascinating. Mm-hmm. I think what he's trying to do, and we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but I do encourage people to go, check out his website. It'll be down in the show notes, see what he's doing. And I think, I know that there are owners that have locked up capital that are figuring out, what's their exit. I don't know if that's Michael's thing, but there are resources, assets, investors, friends in the market that, and Michael kind of represents that. So I really encourage people to learn more about the value-added services that he's trying to provide that really aid entrepreneurs.
Right, absolutely. Well, that wraps up another episode of Heart and Science, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with more creative entrepreneurs on this journey.
Thanks, everybody.